Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us at the MHPN webinar today. Today's topic is the State Historic Preservation Review Board, your partners in the preservation program. Before I turn it over to our speakers, I'd like to go over a few items. If you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A box as you think of them. Questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. Please feel free to use the chat box to share your thoughts and resources. Both the Q&A and the chat boxes should be located in the bar at the bottom of your screen. If the bar disappears, wiggle your mouse and it will come back. The chat window will contain links to resources discussed. There may be polls that pop up during the webinar. Please take a moment and participate in those. Thank you for joining us today and enjoy the webinar. Using Zoom to maximize your participation, ask questions in the Q&A box as you think of them. Oh, I'm sorry, I've skipped one. There we are. The network's mission is that we advocate for Michigan's historic places to contribute to our economic vitality, sense of place, and connection to the past. We could not do the work we do without our members and volunteers. Please join the network at mhpn.org. This webinar is supported by an award from the Michigan Arts and Culture Council. The State Historic Preservation Review Board, partners in the preservation program. Today's seminar will be presented by Todd Walsh, National Register Coordinator at the Michigan State Historic Preservation Office. Todd Walsh has served as the National Register Coordinator for the Michigan Nhpa since 2017 and has worked in various roles since joining the Nhpa staff in 2003. As the National Register Coordinator, Todd works with a broad range of property owners, developers, consultants, organizations, and communities, as well as state and federal agencies. He provides technical assistance, guidance, and education to nomination preparers. Todd also serves as the staff liaison for the State Historic Preservation Review Board. He holds an undergraduate degree in history from Michigan State University and a master's degree in public administration from Western Michigan University. Todd, take it away and feel free to share your screen.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today to talk about the State Historic Preservation Review Board. Before I begin, I want to thank Chris and Xiaohan and MHPN for letting me talk to you today. During our time today, I want to talk about four main topics. What is the the Historic Preservation Program? What is the State Historic Preservation Review Board? What is the board's relationship to Nhpa? And who serves on the board? And at the end, we'll have some time for questions. So first, the preservation program. Discussing the preservation program could be a separate talk in and of itself. And I won't go into too many details today, but it's important to understand where the Preservation Review Board comes from. The foundation of all federal preservation programs administered by Nhpa is the National Historic Preservation Act. From this one act, excuse me for a second, federal preservation activities were formalized and rationalized, and as importantly, they were democratized. NHPA created the State Historic Preservation Officer and the State Historic Preservation Office that established, or through the NHPA, states were given responsibility to identify, register, and protect, to the extent possible, significant historical and architectural resources. It expanded the National Register of Historic Places to include locally significant properties. It established a Certified Local Government Program. It led to the Historic Resources Survey Program and created the Section 106 review and consultation process. And it created the State Historic Preservation Review Board. One of the features and important aspects of NHPA is its democratic nature. It is designed for partnerships. In fact, the program would not work without individuals at all levels working for a common goal. The various programs that make up the Federal Preservation Program rely on citizens, local governments, and state government. The National Register of Historic Places embodies this ideal. The register is built by the work of people and communities across the country working with and through their State Historic Preservation Office, who in turn works with the staff of the National Park Service. The result is one list of our nation's important historic resources that have been identified, documented, and reviewed at multiple levels. One of the most important parts of that process is the review by the State Historic Preservation Review Board. Now let's talk a little bit about what the review board is and what its roles and responsibilities are. The foundation of the review board, its membership and its activities, is found in the National Historic Preservation Act. Federal regulations elaborate on those responsibilities and describe to some extent the board's relationship with Nhpa and its role in that particular processes. NHPA and federal regulations allow the states to further define the role and responsibilities of the board. And in Michigan, there are two applicable laws that address the review board: Executive Order 53 of 2007 and Public Act 169 of 1970. At the federal level, NHPA creates a broad foundation for the function of the board. 36 CFR 60 and 61 elaborate on NHPA and provide more specific information about the makeup, responsibilities, and relationship of the board to Nhpa. The Manual for Historic Preservation, published by the National Park Service, further defines the board's roles and responsibilities and provides additional guidance to the board and to Nhpa's. At the state level, there are two laws that address the board: Executive Order 53 of 2007 and Public Act 169 of 1970. In addition to the responsibilities prescribed in federal law and regulation, state law determines who the appointing authority is for the board members, the composition of the board to a certain extent, and the term length. Public Act 169 also provides for board review of local historic district study committee reports and gives the board appellate jurisdiction in matters of historic district commission decisions. Collectively, state law and federal law, regulations, and guidance identify some general responsibilities and some specific responsibilities. In addition to the specific duties, board members should be advocates for preservation, not just as a means of preserving our shared history, but as an important planning tool for communities small and large. Board members should also share their expertise and knowledge. As we'll see in a bit, the board collectively has a wide range of experience, knowledge, and expertise. The board has several specific responsibilities. Two of the most important of these are the review of National Register nominations and serving as an appellate body in Historic District Commission decisions. The board reviews 20 to 25 National Register nominations per year on average, and between 5 and 10 nominations per meeting. Nominations of individual properties average 30 to 40 pages, and nominations for historic districts typically run between 100 and 150 pages. The diversity of the board serves as a tremendous filter. Members bring their unique experience and skills to each nomination, and the review results in advice that ranges from simple grammatical errors, such as an errant comma, to important physical aspects of a building, or to improved understanding of broad historical themes. Included in this review are requests to remove properties from the National Register. The regulations provide specific criteria that must be met for a property to be removed from the register, the most common reason being demolition. So what is the review board's relationship to Nhpa? As we've seen, the review board has specific roles and responsibilities, and thus a specific relationship to Nhpa. As much as the board and its members serve as advisors and guides and partners in the preservation process generally, and to Nhpa particularly, the board is also an independent body. The opinions and decisions of the board, even when they concur with Nhpa and Nhpa staff, are entirely separate from that of Nhpa staff in the State Historic Preservation Office and officer. In fact, the board serves as an important review and check on the nomination process. To illustrate the relationship of the role of the board, I want to take a few minutes to look at the National Register nomination process. The full process from initial inquiry to ultimate listing can really be looked at as 4 individual processes. And really, we could add a 5th being a historic resources survey. It's the foundation of all of the preservation programs and where our general information and decision-making should start. But for today's purposes, we'll begin with the National Register of Historic Places preliminary questionnaire at the top. The questionnaire is not an application for listing in the National Register, but simply a preliminary evaluation by Nhpa staff to determine if the property meets the National Register criteria and is eligible for listing. That way you can move forward in greater confidence with the actual nomination and not expend a lot of resources and time for something that's not going to end with a listed property. Assuming the property is eligible, the second process, the preparation of the actual nomination, occurs. This part of the process consists of additional Nhpa staff review, and the bulk of the time involves a draft and revision process, where the preparer of the nomination will submit a draft or revised draft to Nhpa staff. Nhpa staff will provide comments on that draft until it's complete, until it makes a satisfactory argument for listing or for the property for listing in the National Register. Once it's complete, then it's scheduled for presentation to the review board. About 30 days before the board meeting, Nhpa staff transmits the nomination to the board. They review the nomination, and in that 30 days, they review the nomination. At the review board meeting, the board can approve the nomination. They can approve it with certain revisions. They can table the nomination, or they can disapprove the nomination. The approval or disapproval of the nomination is the board's formal response to the nomination and their formal action in this preservation process. That formal motion signifies to the preservation officer whether to sign or not to sign the nomination. It's important to take a moment to clarify that the roles of the Nhpa staff, the Nhpa, and the review board, and what actually and technically is going on in this instance. You know, you'll often hear about a Nhpa determination or that Nhpa determines something eligible. What we're actually doing is providing our opinion. The only person with the authority to make a determination, an actual formal determination, is the keeper of the National Register or their designee. The same thing is true at a lower level. So we are providing our opinion. When someone submits a preliminary questionnaire, we are providing our staff opinion that the information that were presented appears to make an argument for or that the property is eligible. If we find that the property to be eligible, if the preservation officer signs the property, if the property is eligible and the preservation officer agrees with the review board, the preservation officer signs the nomination form. That is the formal act of nominating the property to the National Register. Once the Park Service receives it and reviews it, the keeper or their designee signs the nomination. That's the formal act of listing it in the National Register. Regulations also provide instruction for when the State Historic Preservation Officer and the review board disagree. In that case, both opinions are sent to the keeper of the National Register for a final decision. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about who serves on the review board. Much like the roles and responsibilities of the board, the qualifications for serving on the review board are described in NHPA 36 CFR 60 and 61 and in state law. Generally, all board members must demonstrate competence or interest or knowledge in historic preservation. NHPA itself defines 10 specific disciplines that qualify someone for serving on the board. CFR Part 60.3 further identifies these disciplines and actually specifies American history rather than just history generally. 36 CFR Part 63 also or adds that, excuse me, that citizen members may also serve on the review board. 36 CFR Part 61 Appendix A provides qualifications for several disciplines presented in NHPA and 36 CFR Part 60. In Michigan, Executive Order 53 of 2007 creates requirements specific to Michigan. That executive order specifies that the board must include 9 members, that 5 of those members must meet the requirements described in 36 CFR 61 Appendix A, that the disciplines of history, architectural, and archaeology must be represented, and that board members serve for a term of 4 years. At present, the board is composed of 2 archaeologists, 2 historians, 3 architects, 1 architectural historian, and 1 historic preservationist. Collectively, the members are university professors, practicing architects, our former state archaeologist, a tribal historic preservation officer. Other members of the group have served on historic district commissions and other history-related boards. They have led trainings for various aspects of preservation and have published numerous books, articles, and papers, and have presented at numerous conferences. Executive Order 53 of 2007 also gives appointing authority to the governor of Michigan. Prior to that time, appointments were made by the State Historic Preservation Officer. The executive order also specifies that SHPO makes recommendations for board members when vacancies are there. But it's important to note that while the SHPO makes recommendations to the governor may or may not take those recommendations into consideration, and appointments are made at the discretion of the governor. In addition to SHPO recommendations, the governor's office also seeks out the opinion of other history-related organizations. Executive Order 53 also gives the authority for appointing the chair of the review board to the governor, though the board members select a vice chair from among their members. Much like appointments for the board in general, SHPO makes recommendations for the chair, and the governor may or may not take those recommendations into consideration. SHPO provides its recommendations to the governor's office in the fall of every year, so about this time. And appointments are made by the governor's office as they work through them. It depends on their workload and staff resources and their investigation process and their background check process. To be considered for the review board, one must complete the boards and commissions application at the governor's website. If you apply for the board, we encourage you to let us know as well. And we encourage you to send a letter of interest and your CV or resume to the attention of me or the State Historic Preservation Officer. And with that, I thank you for your time. I hope this presentation was interesting and useful, and I look forward to answering any of your questions.
Todd, the first question that we have is it still possible for a private individual or group to author a National Register nomination, or is it now complex enough a process that you really need to hire a professional?
Excellent question, first of all. So thank you to whoever submitted that. I appreciate it. I will say this, the answer is both. The National Register of Historic Places is meant to include everyone. It's meant to include homeowners, developers, professional historians and consultants. It would be disingenuous to suggest that it is easy for someone who is unfamiliar with the National Register program to produce a sufficient nomination without some extensive reading and guidance by us. That being said, I've worked with several people over the years who are first or second time individuals and not professional consultants that have written excellent nominations. It has taken them some time, but they've done it. And I would encourage anyone to try it before hiring a consultant, or at a minimum, fill out the preliminary questionnaire, first for yourself to get a sense of it. to support the efforts of individuals to do nominations on their own. And, I should say, this isn't to take anything away from our wonderful consultants. We have many great consultants in Michigan, and they do great work. And I would encourage anybody to engage with them and to use their services. But if someone is interested in doing it themselves, we have recently put online a document on our National Register page, and you see the URL at the bottom of the screen there, michigan.gov/NRHP. It's called General Guidance and Requirements for National Register Nominations in Michigan. And that document should help someone walk through, along with the other National Park Service guidance, to walk through a nomination and do a pretty good job by themselves. It answers a lot of questions. It elaborates on Bulletin 16A, which is the basic instruction manual for the National Register. It elaborates on Bulletin 15. It brings together some other pieces of guidance that have evolved over the years that aren't really addressed in Bulletin 16 or 15. So, I really encourage people to start with those things. Read through the stuff on our website. It's going to be a lot of reading up front for somebody who's unfamiliar. But if they are interested in doing this themselves, that is the place to start. It wouldn't be, the National Register, it's important to note that the National Register is not a history documentation program by itself. It is not meant for history's sake. It is not meant as a commemorative history, documentation program. It is in the regulations defined as a planning program. And so what I would tell people that it's history in the service of planning is to let federal government, state government, local governments know that whatever place you're nominating is important and significant in our collective history. Keeping that in mind will help someone frame their arguments for significance, frame the development of historic context, address the various aspects of a nomination that need to be addressed, because what you're really doing is not just documenting a chronological or a genealogical history of a place, but making an argument to me, to other Nhpa reviewers, to NPS reviewers, to the review board itself as to why this place is significant. And that is the kind of frameworks somebody should work within when they're doing this. Making an argument to the board, to me, to the State Historic Preservation Officer, to someone removed from Michigan in Washington, reviewing this as the sole piece of information they're going to review. They're looking at this and looking for an argument for significance. And I think if someone takes that approach, if they keep that in mind going into it, and if they read the guidance that's available, and I would also say, ask questions. It's really good to talk to me before you begin. Talk to, my colleague, Nathan Niedering, and I before you begin the nomination process. We can give you kind of a framework to work within. We can point out what might be difficult or what might be easy. Sometimes we see people want to take a shotgun approach to significance and check every box that's possible. And that is a recipe for failure and disaster. It's because of the nature of the National Register program. It would require making an argument for all of those, for those multiple areas of significance, for developing a historic context for all those areas of significance, substantiating all that information. And it really detracts from the argument that you're making. And really what somebody wants to do is focus on the essential significance of the property. And that might be social history and architecture. There might be archaeological significance. There might be 3 or 4 different areas that are essential to understanding the property. But if you're getting to the secondary areas of significance, like, well, it's kind of important for this too, I would set the kind ofs aside and focus on the essentials. So it's kind of a long-winded answer, but truthfully, it is possible for someone to do it, provided they have the time and the resources and the patience, and they put the effort in. And it's not an easy program, but it's a possible program. And I'm happy to work with anybody who wants to try it.
Very good. I'm going to do this out of order because a question came up that I think addresses some of the questions about, can JOQ Public do this?
Yeah.
Does the review board update older nominations is the question, but that points up the fact that at some point in the past, and I'm not sure what year that was in, the process became more intensive. It's definitely not the process it was in 1973.
Yeah.
So does the review board update older nominations?
So I'm going to kind of reframe that question just a little bit. So just to clarify that the board doesn't have any action in the production of a nomination. They are a review body. So, but do they consider updated nominations? And the answer to that question is yes. Does the State Historic Preservation Officer and Preservation Officer and the National Register Coordinator encourage people to update nominations? Absolutely. There are nominations can be updated, sometimes quite easily. Sometimes it takes a little more work depending on the update, but they can be updated to correct a name. We've done that recently. They can be updated to correct address information, locational information, geographical information. They can be updated to add areas of significance. They can be updated to increase or decrease boundaries. They can be updated to change the period of significance. So they can be updated for any number of reasons.
Sure.
When some things like technical corrections don't necessarily need to go before the review board. So in the case of changing, identifying the incorrect name and correcting a name is a technical correction that we can just submit. Correcting an address, we can just submit that to the Park Service. When you get into adding criteria or areas of significance and changing boundaries, that is something that we would send to the review board for the board to review.
Sure.
In the case of a boundary alteration, that automatically becomes a new nomination and has to go before the board anyway. So yes, we are happy to consider that. And like I said before, if that's something that is of interest, I would definitely talk to us first.
I was just going to say it's a good idea to consult, especially if the boundaries change and, like you said, that become a new nomination.
Yeah. So, some of the things that we would probably maybe discourage might be the wrong word, but would see as not a significant addition is adding new ownership information. Those things. It's because it's not the intent of the program. If the nomination is documented sufficiently, and this is just adding extra information that doesn't support significance or doesn't add an area of significance, we would question whether that's really an important thing to add, because again, it's not a history documentation program. And that's in that case, that's when it's best to really talk to us first, and get a sense of like, what does this fit into something that's worthwhile submitting to the National Register.
I understand. So if we could move on to the next question. Can an individual bring themselves to your attention as a potential member of the review board, or must they be sponsored by someone or by an institution? No,
not at all. Anyone who's interested, send me a note. Like I said, it's best to send a letter of interest and a CV. Also, if you're seriously interested, I'll tab back here really quick. If you go to the governor's website, you will see at the top, it says appointments there in the middle. You click on that and you'll get this page where you can apply to serve on a board or commission. Beyond that, I think there's another link you need to click, and there's an application process there. That is the primary thing for consideration. So the board or the governor's office will not consider someone who has not filled out the application. No matter how strenuously we recommend them. They must fill out that application. So start there, send us your information as well. And then, if it fits the parameters of what we're looking for, we can include those in our recommendations. We try to maintain a diversity of disciplines, a diversity of location, geographical location, and representation across the state. We are trying very hard to increase our racial diversity of the board. So I would encourage other groups to apply to the board. I am very, very proud and pleased, that we have our very first tribal historic preservation officer serving on the board with us now. It's a tremendous thing that we're all excited about, and I'm very thankful for Lakota's service. So it's, the board, you do not need to be sponsored. If you have letters of support, send those with us as well. I'm sure the governor's office would want to see things like that as well. But I would encourage people to be involved.
Very good. Next question. Will you talk more about the appeals process? The person says, I know you can't cite specific situations, but what are the most common reasons for appeals?
Well, so this is getting into the matter of local historic districts, and I am wading into territory that I am not well versed in. My colleague Amy Arnold coordinates that program. And typically what we see before the board is really, I would, if you want more information on the appeals, there is a section on our website at michigan.gov/Nhpa in the local historic districts area that has proposals for decision. And those are historical ones anyway, and we're about to upload another batch of those. Those proposals really lay out and describe really well what the facts of the various cases are in communities around the state. It's really, it could be someone that didn't follow the process and didn't go through the process. It could be that the commission made a decision that the homeowner or property owner was not happy with, or that's not consistent. I'm really hesitant to get into details about that because they are so specific, and they, I just don't think it's appropriate to make sweeping generalizations about various things.
Sure.
Because they're so nuanced.
Okay, then we can move on. Very roughly, how long does it take to produce a nomination for an individual property or for a district?
So what we tell people is a typical nomination that can mean a lot of things, 12 to 18 months from initial inquiry to listed in the National Register. Now, that depends on the complexity of the property. It depends on the resources and experience of the preparer. It depends on somewhat on our workload because we are short-staffed at the moment, and it takes us time to review things. And sometimes things intervene that we can't foresee that delay our review of other nominations. It also depends on whether the preparer has followed our guidance and the things that are out there, and how responsive they are to our questions and comments and revisions and edits. Sometimes, so for, depends on things like COVID. I had a nomination that somebody had started, 2017 or 2018 with an initial inquiry, and the property was just listed this year, for various reasons. And, there are nominations that typically, I say plan for 2 or 3 is what we tell people typically. Draft and revisions. That goes for novice and experienced preparers alike. It has been the occasion when someone has submitted a single, one draft, and it's been, everything's been perfect and it's been approved by us and scheduled for the review board. And I've had up to 9 revisions and drafts. And, and unfortunately, the person at that time decided not to continue with it. And
So
everything in
varies.
between.
Sorry?
Sorry?
So it varies.
It varies. But
Widely.
I would say plan for 12 to 18 months, plan for 2 or 3 drafts, and don't be surprised if it's less or more.
Very good. Next question, what kind of protection does National Register listing provide a property? I understand that an individual using their own funds can still make inappropriate changes to their National Register listed property.
That is absolutely correct. The National Register does not by itself offer any protection whatsoever. At the same time, the National Register does not interfere in private property rights. So it's on 2 sides of the same coin. Protection is encouraged through things like our historic tax credit programs. There is some protection offered through the Section 106 consultation process, but that process alone does not stop a project. It seeks alternatives to adverse effects. But
Protection really comes from the local
absolutely
HDC.
Yeah, absolutely.
Historic district, yeah.
Yeah, and protection can also be had through historic preservation easements or covenants too.
Sure.
But the register by itself does not, does not offer anything. And the 106 process only applies in the case of federal actions, federal, grants, grant funding, licenses, permits, etc. So yes, a property owner can have their house listed in the National Register one day and demolished it the next day, and there's nothing that will be done other than being removed from the National Register.
Sure. Okay, moving on. It's very exciting what nominations are coming in from underrepresented communities. Can you talk some about recent nominees? For example, one of your slides had the Malcolm X house, and we were excited to see that. So talk to us about nominations coming from underrepresented communities.
No, it's been a singular joy and honor of my own to be leading this program at the time that we are broadening the types of nominations that we're seeking out ourselves, that we're seeing people from other people. It's a tremendous time, and it's really great.
That's been on NPR quite a bit. The push for African American churches.
Yep.
And these are very interesting segments that just they grab you, and they're very interesting to see. And I'm happy to see that as well.
Yeah, it is. And quite frankly, a big bulk of the credit goes to the National Park Service. They, years ago, they started working on theme studies that addressed various aspects of the African American experience in the country. The various programs that they've established, grant programs that have funded nominations and funded rehabilitation work and funded other things, have contributed to this. But it's also an awareness of the fact that historically these things have been neglected.
Sure.
African American resources, Native American resources, and LGBTQ resources, and so many other underrepresented groups that aren't represented in the National Register have been neglected. And in my time, it's not because for any other reason than it was awareness and realization of the fact that we can do better. And I would love to hear from anybody from any community that has resources that are significant in their communities that they want to include in the National Register.
The thing that I find so interesting about it is, while we are very interested in the buildings themselves, it's that narrative. We want that narrative. We want to hear the story. Yeah, makes that building significant. That's really the important part, and those are really important narratives to get to that, frankly, we have ignored in the past. And it's our job to go and find those. And so I think that's super important.
No, it is. And I'm glad you said that, Chris, that it's our job, and it is our job, and it is our responsibility to, and here's for me, the key is this: I am not the expert. I am the guide in this program. Whether, whatever area of history you're talking about, whether you're talking about prehistory all the way to modern history, I am not the expert. I am your guide, and I will guide you through this program. I will, look to you for, that expertise that, for whatever property that we're looking at. I will, ask questions, and I will, do the best I can to help you make the best argument for the property to the National Register.
Great.
But it's the people that have the stories that are the experts. And it's my honor, my distinct honor to be able to help tell those stories.
Excellent. Next question here. What role does the review board play with the governor's awards made each year?
Great question. Thank you. Yes, and I think I had that on a slide, but I didn't talk about it too much. So the review board reviews. We present the staff selects the governor's awardees, and the review board we present those to the review board. My colleague Nathan Niedering heads up that program. They approve that list of that slate of awardees, and much like with a nomination, they are making a recommendation for us to proceed with those and send those to the governor for their approval.
Very good. This question from our friend Cheryl Early. Do you have to serve on a local HDC board, Historic District Commission board, first to serve on the review board?
No.
Yeah, I think you went over that pretty well.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, but no, a lot of members have, and a lot of members probably will after their time on the board, but there's no singular requirement other than what's spelled out in NHPA and the executive orders. But as far as a certain, do you have, and I would extend that even further, do you have to have published certain things, in various journals or history publications? Do you have to have written a nomination? And no, there's nothing like that that would preclude someone from serving on the board. Like I said, we try to maintain a diversity of disciplines. We try to maintain a balance of disciplines. And so as architectural historians or architects or historians, terms expire and they indicate that they do not want to be reappointed, or in the case that maybe the governor will not reappoint them, we try to replace those with like disciplines. Sure. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they will be, and that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to. In there, do we when we're reviewing and making recommendations, do we look at things like that, like previous service and contributions?
Sure, the credential.
All that? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course we do, but there are no hard requirements for that.
One question that comes up for me, you listed the disciplines that are on the board right now.
Yeah.
And when I did the quick math, it was 9 people.
Yes. Does
the board size change, or is it limited to 9 people?
It is specified in the executive order from 2007 that, yeah, it is 9. And there are a minimum of 5 must meet the qualifications spelled out in NHPA.
Sure. Quorum.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Moving on. Todd, can you speak to how physical integrity is being considered by the review board to accommodate new kinds of nominees, sometimes coming from underrepresented communities that we want to welcome?
Yeah. Well, I think so. I think that there has been a historical assumption that condition and integrity are aligned, that they are similar things. And, certainly if you look at historical nominations, we've seen there's some very fine architecture. And even presently, there's some very fine architecture being listed in the National Register. But the thing about integrity is it's specific to the significance of the property. And that's been the case throughout the program. I think there is more of an awareness of the fact that there's a distinction between condition and integrity. And the thing that I look for, regardless of property, is can this, and the thing that really a preparer should make an argument for in every nomination is, can this property, no matter its condition, convey its significance? And if so, how so? What are the distinctive features and characteristics of that property that allow it to, regardless of condition? So whether you have, a high style Tudor revival house or something that's, been altered or in a very, poor state of condition, what are the features of it that convey it, that can help it, that convey its significance? I would encourage someone to look at some of the recent nominations that have come before the board and look and compare something that would be in good condition versus something that would be in not so good condition.
And there's an archive that Joe Q public can go to and read those.
So,
I'm sorry, I caught you on
no. I'm not laughing at your question. I'm laughing at the answer. So, yes, but is the answer to that question.
Okay.
So several years ago, the National Archives has scanned a number up to 2013, the nominations in all the states. At the same time, the National Register of Historic Places maintains a collection of nominations on their website, though not all of them. And there is a gap still between what's on that site and what has been listed. And so if somebody is interested in a nomination, you can go and look for it. But it's probably best just to send me an email or to send Nathan an email or email preservation@michigan.gov. And one of us will get you a link to the nomination or send you a copy of it via PDF.
Very good.
Now, there will be some nominations that will not be accessible because they are restricted. And that individuals need to meet qualifications and work through the National Park Service to obtain those.
All right. Next question. And you mentioned how short-staffed the SHPO is right now, but do you have a backlog of nominations?
Always.
Always.
Yeah, always. So just to put some numbers around that. So we, I think last year we ended up with 40 to 50 nominations and preliminary questionnaires that were in some sort of process. I think we ended up listing 25, and the thing is that was just what was received in the last year, not
Sure.
what was, from the year before, and not what's been going, since our fiscal year rolled over. So, at one time there was I shouldn't say a backlog. That's not really the best word for it, but we had some, 80 nominations in some sort of process, whether it be a preliminary questionnaire or, waiting to be presented to the review board or waiting for a listing from the National Register.
Sure.
That's that's somewhat smaller now, but there is quite a number of things that are in process and ongoing and actively being reviewed. And there is a substantial, I don't know about backlog, but body of work. Let me say that.
Sure. All right. Moving on. The SHPO and the review board are very careful about what they forward to Washington. How often do Michigan nominations get returned, and for what kinds of reasons? We kind of went over that before, but maybe this is a little more specific.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, I would say that in a year, we might get 5 to 7, maybe 8 nominations returned. And that can be for something, technical corrections, a boundary on a map isn't exactly lining up, or something, needs to be just developed a little bit more. There's been in my time, I believe, 2 nominations that have been returned from NPS as not eligible. And or not eligible for the reasons put forth. And that's an important distinction to make, that they did not say, in my recollection, that the property was just flatly not eligible, but that the arguments made did not make a case for significance based on the information that they saw and read. 99 times out of 100, something's being returned for minor corrections or additional documentation.
Mm-hmm.
Most recently, we had one returned for what I would classify as maybe a little bit more intensive information. I will say this too, and much credit goes to NPS and to our reviewer, that the things that they point out are uniformly correct. When I go back and read the nominations, say, yeah, I see their point. This could have been done better. This should have been done that way. They, based on their workloads and the number of nominations from the number of states that they review, it is a tremendous thing that they do with incredible accuracy and detail. And really, the thing about the return nomination, understand, is that yes, it's being returned, and yes, it can be frustrating for the delay, but it is born out of the same goal that we all have, is to see this property listed and to put the best nomination forward for that property.
Sure.
So I credit my NPS colleagues for the work that they do, because they help us, produce better nominations.
All right. Moving on. Are most of the nominations that come forward to you already covered by established contexts? And are you still authoring new contexts in Michigan? And where can I find a list of those contexts?
Man, good questions. So in some cases, nominations are covered by existing, what I will call formal context, and that is a document that's been produced specifically for a particular theme. There are other nominations that are, similar in theme to something that's already listed, and they can borrow from those nominations.
Mm-hmm.
Are we producing additional contexts? Yes, by the fact that certain properties require the development of a context, but formal contexts come about very rarely just because of time and resources.
Mm-hmm.
So recent examples would be our civil rights thematic nomination, and our banks and apartment buildings in Detroit a thematic nomination or thematic documentation. Those are formal context statements. Those are formal multiple property documentation forms that provide context. That is one area near and dear to my heart. And if I had a magic wand, I would produce them in bunches, because
so another context was brought up either by you or me, and I can't remember, but African-American religious buildings, another context.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and that would be a great thematic study for someone to do. That would be a great thematic study for us to fund through a grant somehow. There are a number of historical thematic studies and contexts that are available through the National Archives website, and that we are in the process of bringing together, and will be available on our own website, hopefully in the next few months. It takes some time to get that stuff together, but we are working to do that so that they're more readily available to people. And the great thing is we look at some of the older nominations, like we talked about, that they can be addressed or improved. And some, truthfully, some really don't. Some are great as they are, but some can. But what's been done really well are some of these thematic nominations from the 80s, when there were time and resources and everything available to do these things. And there are, for a number of communities around the state, and they're fantastic resources that give you that background information that you can either build upon or just use. And so we will have those available, more readily available for people in the future.
Again, another point of consult with us.
Yeah, ask us, and then we can. Yep, and we can help you find those or point you to those. And it is something that again, if I could do it, I would. This is something that we would be doing readily. It's just that it is. If a nomination is intensive, these are way even more intensive, and it requires funding. It requires resources and stuff that we just don't have at present.
All righty, thank you. Moving on, Janet Krieger asks, are you also looking for nominees that reflect women in Michigan? I'm thinking of the Gwen Frostick studio that came before the review board.
Yeah.
She says it was a great nomination. Are there others in the wings?
So there is one. So unfortunately, not to the extent that we would like. There are. Again,
another underrepresented.
Yeah, absolutely.
Series of narratives.
Yeah, exactly. And this is, this is something that we could address or could be addressed through the Underrepresented Communities Grant Program, the History of Equal Rights Grant Programs through NPS. But there's one really cool one coming up for the Francis Harper Inn in Detroit. I won't go into a lot of detail right now, but look for that at a coming review board meeting. It's a really neat nomination that talks about a really important aspect of African-American women's history in Detroit. So look for that one coming soon. But Great. Beyond that, there's not a lot. And again, I would encourage those interested in nominating properties associated with significant women in Michigan history to work on those, do those things. Even if it takes you 5 years to write the darn nomination, work on it and help work with us to do that, because it is important and it should be done. And these things, the accomplishments of women, much like any other underrepresented group, should be recognized.
Sure, of course. Okay, moving on. Anonymous is asking, is the reticence over nominating mid-century modern buildings of a dozen years ago a thing of the past? Michigan has a global importance for the modernist movement, and do you still see that reticence?
Goodness, I hope not. I hope it's past. I will tell as hopefully the commenter knows, and hopefully everyone listening knows, that for a number of years we had a very broad and I would say successful effort to identify and really discuss and bolster and just take ownership of Michigan's unique role in the development of the modern movement. Hey, thank you. Yes, exactly.
There's a plug.
And that program, that effort identified so many resources across the state
Sure.
that are worthy of inclusion in the National Register. The trick of it is doing the nominations, and that it takes time and money and resources and interest. And many of these things are privately owned, and it's up to the property owner to support that or not support that at their discretion. I love modernism. I love I was privileged to work with Brian Conway and Amy Arnold on that program for many years, among others on our staff. I would welcome if the commenter or if anyone listening has a particular property in mind, work with us. I would love to see more modern resources listed. Our state has a wealth of tremendous modern resources, and that deserve to be listed.
All right. Moving on, another anonymous attendee asks, how often do you visit a property before it starts through the National Register listing process?
This is disappointing. Hardly ever, just because of time and resources. Truthfully, most of what we need to know can be obtained through good photographs, and good.
I would underline good photographs.
Absolutely. And to that point, Chris, on our website, we have a photo specs document that I would encourage people to read, because photographs are uniquely important to the National Register and telling the story and capturing the history of the property. I would encourage everyone to do more than point and shoot. I would encourage everyone to take time to, compose and think about the fact that they are contributing to the knowledge of our history. They're creating a permanent historical record that this thing is going to live on forever and ever, hopefully. And, just like now, people 50 years from now are going to be looking at these things for information, for guidance, they're going to look at change over time. So the photographs are so important, and they deserve more than point and shoot. That being said, Darren, can you remind me of the question again?
How often do you visit a property?
How often do I visit
before it starts through the National Register process?
Not as I would, if I had the time, I would visit every property that came through.
Sure.
It's unfortunately not possible due to our workloads. I will also admit that there is nothing like seeing a building in person.
Sure.
We can learn and discern a lot through photographs and maps and narrative. But seeing something in person, as hopefully all of touching it, experiencing it, walking through it, seeing how it interacts with its environment and neighbors and setting, there's nothing that replaces that experience.
See how the building affects you.
Yeah, exactly. So it bums me out, but it's a reality that we have to deal with. And sure. I think we do a good job absent that.
All right, we're coming up on the last question here. This is another anonymous attendee. What is the tipping point between contributing versus non-contributing properties in a district before that district cannot be considered for nomination to the National Register? This is an interesting question.
Yeah, it is. And there is, unfortunately, the answer is a frustratingly, it depends. It depends on the property. It depends on the significance. It depends on the unique characteristics of that district that's being nominated. There is no, you will see sometimes in older nominations calculations of contributing and non-contributing, 70% or 50% or 90%. That is useful and information. It is interesting information. It is not required. There is no hard and fast rule. either through Nhpa or through the National Park Service, that a historic district must contain a certain number of contributing resources to be an eligible district.
And it goes back to the effectiveness of your narrative
Well, and the significance of the property and the integrity of the property.
to make the case. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And, there are so many unique property types throughout the country that, some of them, would have 100% contributing buildings most likely, or contributing resources, say, and others, 50 or less. And there's everything in between. So if there are questions, is there a district here? Talk to us, engage with us. Our survey coordinator, Katie, and I can come out. We can meet with you and walk your district, even though I just said I don't have a lot of time. But sometimes things like that necessitate a visit. And we do make them in cases like that. So I don't want to portray it as that we're not available. I want to portray it as that we have to be judicious with our time. But we are always willing to help. We're always willing to talk and do things as we need to help you be successful with our programs.
You're a public employee.
Absolutely.
Your main job. And
Yeah.
I would ask you to reiterate that.
Yeah.
Please consult with your office. This is what you're here for.
It is what we're here for. And, I think I can speak for all of us in that sentiment, that we are here to help you make use of our programs. And the best method of success is talking to us early and asking us questions as you go through.
All right, Todd, that wraps us up. This was a great session, and I really appreciate your time and your extensive answers. They are quite good today.
Well,
so that concludes us for today. Next webinar is on November 17th, and that topic is Parkeology and Parkitecture, Cultural Resources Stewardship in our state parks and recreation areas. Thank you for joining us today, and we appreciate your time. Please consider becoming a member of the Michigan Historic Preservation Network at mhpn.org. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.